McCuistion, talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McCuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study and Teaching of the Science of Self-Government, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future, Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.
As many of you know, I've spent much of my life in corporate boardrooms with many very smart people. And one of the problems, though, is that many of the directors look a lot like me, an old white male. There's good reason to believe that more diversity, however defined, is a good thing in the boardroom. And this program will explore what we mean by diversity, what can or should be done, and what can be expected as a result. So let's meet the experts. First, on my right, is James Waters. He's a partner with the law firm of Haynes & Boone, where he represents financial institutions and corporate enterprises in domestic and international finance transactions. He also does a little guest lecturing out at the University of Texas at Dallas as the MBA program. Thank you for that, James.
My pleasure.
And his civic engagement includes service on the Board of Directors and Executive Committee of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth and the Board of Trustees and Executive Committee of the Dallas Theater Center. So you get the nonprofit side, James. Fun stuff, huh?
Absolutely.
They pay the big bucks, right?
Well, they pay what they pay.
Yeah, exactly. You probably contribute what you contribute, I would imagine. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And sitting in the middle here is a guy that I've known well for the last several years. His name is Richard LeBlanc. He is a lawyer with a PhD, and he's Associate Professor of Corporate Governance at the York University in Toronto. He's also a strategic advisor at the Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance, which I have a little something to do with occasionally. And so, Richard, welcome back to Texas.
Thanks, Dennis. Good to be here.
Thank you. I should also say he teaches corporate governance at Harvard. You were a little time at Harvard during the summer. Now, Renee Hornbaker is here, and she's the CFO of Stream Energy, and she's a board member of Eastman Chemical, and I think you're still head of the audit committee.
Yeah, that's correct.
At Eastman Chemical, which is a big publicly traded company. And most importantly, however, you're the North Texas chapter president of the National Association of Corporate Directors. So, Renee, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dennis.
So, Renee, let me just start with you. You and I probably had this conversation 10 years ago. You and I think maybe Eliza Solander invited me to lunch one day and said, Dennis, we need to get more women on boards or something like that. Wasn't it? Didn't we have a conversation like that?
We did. I think we've had one every year since then, I think.
Have we? Okay. So what do we say a diversity challenge? What is the challenge? Where are we, and why do we need to talk about this issue?
Well, I think you teed it up pretty well at the start when you said that when you were on boards, it was a lot of white males that looked a lot like you. And that's one of the challenges, is it's still a lot of white males, and we need different perspectives and different views and different experiences, because people that have a lot of the common experiences have groupthink. So diversity is really trying to get at the issue of preventing groupthink and representing also the constituencies of the companies that we represent.
All right, that's a good idea. However, Renee, one of the things that we talked about 10 years ago is how do we get enough women, speaking of women just at this point, who are qualified. So I'll give you an example. I was in India earlier this year speaking to a group of MBA students over there about corporate governance. And just before I got there, they passed a law, as Richard knows, that says that every publicly traded company in India has to have a woman on the board. Now, last I checked, there were about, I think it's 1,600 publicly traded companies or something in India. And I figured there were probably 4 women in India qualified, so everyone had to serve on 400 boards. How do you feel about that?
I think that's how you define what's qualified to serve on a board too narrowly.
Yeah.
If you define it as you've got to be a CEO of a company, then yes, you're going to have a limited population. But there is a lot of qualified women and people of different race that are more than qualified in their current positions to serve on boards. But the problem is they don't know those people that are sitting on boards well enough to come to mind when we say, well, we're looking for a new board member. Who we turn to? Richard, who do you know?
Mostly Richards, yeah. And that's part of the issue is recruitment tends to be based on personal and professional relationships. So there's academic evidence that in fact doing that is the completely wrong thing to do, because you're not independent from your fellow colleagues, and you become captured and compromised because you have professional and personal relationships, and you're less able to burn through effective conflict in a boardroom. So the nature, what we advise women needs to change. It shouldn't, imagine if you wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor and the advice was you have to network more. So we need, regulators now are moving from this notion of networking to merit-based recruiting. And that includes qualifications. The qualification to sit on a corporate board is astonishingly minimal. You need to be over 18, not bankrupt, and not insane, or not found to be insane by a judge. So the notion that women are inherently unqualified is, the evidence doesn't support that. Once you peel back the onion and talk about very specific competencies and experiences that women, that younger directors, that ethnic directors have, oftentimes it's a myth that women are not qualified. They're very qualified.
Yeah, very qualified. And you've fortunately been in more corporate boardrooms than any one individual I know. You've watched the behavior. Tell us what you see in terms of, is there a difference between behavior when there are people of diversity, any way we define it here, than just a bunch of old white males?
The evidence is that a bunch of old white males tends to adopt a homogenous decision-making style, and they don't push back and mitigate groupthink, which is the single detriment to corporate decision-making. Women, other types of directors with different experiences are more likely to push back, particularly 3 women is this magic number, and the academic evidence supports this as well. We have, for example, 56% of Canadian boards with not a single woman on them. So we need to move the needle significantly to get 1, 2, 3 directors. One of our large shareholders said recently, we want 3 women on every TSX-listed board, or you should be delisted. So there is an uptake now and an appetite by institutional shareholders, by director associations, by corporate boards themselves that are starting to have these discussions.
Well, which is where we'd like it to happen as opposed to at a government level. Is that basically right?
That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
And that's the whole thing. Now, James, a couple of different perspectives here. First of all, you're in these boardrooms with these people. So first of all, give us some sense of what you see, number one, and then secondly, give us an idea where you're coming from on this topic.
Well, absolutely. Richard made the point well that groupthink tends to emerge from homogeneous environments. In addition to that, you've got a lack of perspective simply by virtue of the fact that there are individuals who tend to see things in the same way, have the same experiences, and ultimately have not had the breadth of experiences that you're likely to find in a broader and more diverse pool. I'll also note that the point made by Renee was well made and well taken. That is, that if you tap into the same pool of individuals, you will come out with the same kinds of candidates. If you dip your line into the same pool, you'll come back with the same fish. I think part of the challenge is that people who are interested in diversity, even well-meaning, often don't know where to look and often don't effectively tap into pools of prospective candidates different from those who are at their country club, their church, their neighborhood, and so forth.
Well, we have good search firms these days, and the problem is, Renee, they cost money, right? But search firms do tap into a group that we don't necessarily know. They're not part of the good old boy network, which is one good thing. Secondly, I would suspect as a lawyer, you probably get to ask your opinion a lot too about people. References, yes?
Certainly.
And so if you know some good people, that would be good. You get asked all the time. I know we all do at NACD.
Yes.
At NACD, we've got a guy sitting behind us over here who's the general counsel of the National Association of Corporate Directors. I'm going to get him up here in a minute and let him tell us. But obviously, we got a whole pool of people out there just waiting to be recruited, don't we?
Yes, and I think people that women and other minorities that want to get on boards need to make their voice known. They need to start networking with the people on boards and tell them that they'd like to get on boards and why they believe they're qualified to get on boards. And and they may need to do some education. They may need to go to an NACD program to get educated to demonstrate why they're qualified to be on boards.
Mm-hmm. And Richard, let me get back to the idea. And Steve, let me, before I forget it, come up here. Let me talk to you. You don't want to say anything, but I want you to say something here. So I'm gonna first go to Richard, and I'm gonna come back to you, so you'll be ready. So Richard, we talk about diversity, and we think about diversity in terms of women, minorities, whatever, but that's really not all the diversity equation here. Tell us what we really mean when we say diversity on boards. It's not just gender and sex and ethnicity, is it?
The difficulty is once you define it downward. I'll give you an example. I had a lawyer tell me the other day that his board of all white males was diverse because they had diversity of perspective, and he made what he thought was a compelling argument. We need to define, the first challenge for a board is what is diversity? And you hit the nail on the head. Gender, ethnicity, and age tend to be the big, followed forth by geography, tend to be the big ticket items that boards are talking about. When you flip into diversity of skill, diversity of perspective, diversity of background, it can quickly diminish the robustness that a policy has. So diversity policies are being developed by forward-leading boards on how do we define diversity, what are our measurable objectives, what will work for our company, in our business, in our industry, because the industries are different. Retail is very different from mining. And really a board owned and thoughtful with leadership from the NACD on what does diversity mean and how are we going to go out and tap into this, this pool. That needs to be put into writing in the form of a diversity policy. And it's now the law in Canada, the US, in several countries for boards to do this, to craft their own diversity policy.
Okay, good. Now, this is Steve Walker. Steve, you're General Counsel, the National Association of Corporate Directors in Washington, D.C., and you run the Board Advisory Services. So tell us what NACD in general is trying to do about this, and how often do you think about it, and then what is this great database that we have as well?
Well, Dennis, thank you. I think, NACD in and of itself is the microcosm within the entire universe of directors. We have 15,500 members who are believers, who are the ones who are really leading the charge, and actually created a Blue Ribbon Commission report in 2012. We updated from a previous report on diversity. And so when we're speaking to our members, we're actually speaking to those who are forward-thinking and thinking about this issue. We have come to the conclusion through putting together a very diverse panel that diversity is a real responsibility of the NomGov committees, NomGov chairs, making it simply a priority on their boards to seek out diverse candidates. We have at the NACD the Directors Registry, and I happen to see the inquiries that come in, and we are literally getting requests for very specific skill sets, but when all things are equal, we want to see diversification of gender, ethnicity on those boards because it's critical. Mm-hmm. It's critical. Look at our demographics of the United States today. Look at our customer base. Look at who's shopping. Look at who your employees are. We're doing it within the ranks of our employees. So we've got to do it at the top. It's tone at the top.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. One of the things that I've had the pleasure of doing over time is working with Steve and the group. And I'm in a lot of publicly traded boardrooms because of that. And Renee, you'll love this story. I was in one last fall, and I'm obviously not going to mention the company. Great company, by the way. And they had one woman on the 12-person board, and they had a retirement policy of 75. There were 4 people who had just turned 75. She was one of them, 75. He mentioned NomGov, for those of you who are not corporate folks, Nominating and Governance Committee that's responsible for all this. And so they were trying to figure out whether they needed to find one more woman or not to take the place of the 175-year-old who was about to retire. And their product, Renee, 80% of all the products they sell are bought by women. That was really the telling thing to me. So how do you feel about that?
I think that board needs some education. I think that particularly if you look at who their customers are, they need some education. But to wait till somebody's 75 and then to look at bringing on a token, maybe considering another token woman, that's a problem. It shouldn't be about tokenism. It really needs to be about somebody that's really qualified to be there, but just happens to be a woman or a minority.
What has happened is retirement age has been a proxy for effectiveness, and it's moved from 69, 70, 71, 72, 75. We now are having regulators that have realized this and are turning off the tap at 9 years. And they're saying in Asia, in the United Kingdom, in India, after 9 years, you're off the board. You're no longer independent. We need to renew. I've counseled out directors that have served on boards 10, 15, 20 years. In Texas, in a couple of my speeches, we had directors put up their hand. They've been on the board for over 50 years. Part of the problem is directors, and it can be men and women, are just refusing to step down. So we have regulators now that are forcing that renewal with term limits.
But Richard, you don't understand. Once I'm on the board, I mean, obviously
it's not a lifetime appointment.
No one else could do it as well.
That's right. No, it's not. No one is irreplaceable, and we can't talk about the cradle without the grave. We need to get people off of the board in order to get people onto the board.
And further to that point, we know that everyone reaches the grave at some point. Some approach it a bit more quickly than others, and so those boards that are interested in, that are committed to having a diversity of thought, a diversity of racial and gender and ethnic representation, really ought to be thinking about the cradle. That is, they should be thinking about a pipeline. I've certainly seen this in not-for-profit governance context and in corporate governance context, and the sooner a board puts a pipeline in place and starts to identify prospective candidates, starts to network with those individuals, groom them to the extent necessary, the sooner that board will be in position to make use of the talent that those prospects represent.
Boy, James, I agree with you, but I don't see that happening all the time. Do you? I mean, seriously, do you? I mean, we know that inherently, don't we? But does it really happen?
We know that, and it does happen, not with the consistency that we would like. It's the case that some 73.5% of Fortune 500 boards are constituted of men. Constituted solely of men. And so we see that, and we understand that there is a need for a pipeline. We understand the benefits of the pipeline strategy, and indeed we've seen that in other professions and markets. Law firms have embraced pipeline strategies. Consulting companies have embraced pipeline strategies. There's no reason that a board of directors could not do the same with some degree of thoughtfulness and reap the benefits of the strategy.
Well said. Yeah.
Go ahead, Richard.
No, well said. I completely agree with James.
All right, so one of our friends, Julie England, has written a nice little short book on how to get on the board in the first place. It looks to me like one of the problems on diversity is that, Renee, now you're very much in demand on being on boards, but I don't know that you would be if you hadn't gotten on that first one, would you?
Probably not. It's very difficult, but once you're on one, then it's a lot easier to get on your next one, because what they want is somebody that's had board experience, right? And until you get your first board, it's hard to prove that you've got that.
Yeah, and yet the skills that we're looking for, one of the things that you talk about, Richard, so much is this group of effective directors and non-effective directors. What do the people who have some diversity to them bring to the table inherently, if at all, that other people might not bring to the table inherently? Is there any difference there at all?
There is research that women ask tougher questions because they're not compromised socially, politically, professionally inside the boardroom. So they will be the elephant in the room, and there's good research showing that because of the lack of connections to other directors, they're more likely to be critical. They will fire the CEO sooner. They'll ask really tough questions that are off limits. They'll ask the elephant in the room question. So regulators are looking at this empirical literature now, and they're saying they're using diversity as a weapon to renew boards and make them more competent and more responsive to their stakeholders.
Yeah. Now, one of the things you talk about, Renee, is something you call style. Give us some sense of what a woman brings to the table in terms of a different style. Is part of it what Richard's talking about or not?
A little bit. I think in my view, women tend to be more collaborative and try to get more input in different perspectives. I think we've all seen boardrooms where one or two loud voices dominate the conversation and becomes the de facto answer. Whereas if you have somebody that is particularly in a leadership position on a board, a lead director or chairing a significant committee, they're going to ask all the members of the committee for input, or the board. They're going to try to get all those views expressed. Even if they're not in a leadership role, they can step out if there's a discussion and someone hasn't spoken up and even say, well, gee, I've noticed you haven't said something over there. What do you have to say on this topic? And I think women naturally do that. I think also women are good at reading body language and can determine if somebody is not buying into the conversation or has a question about something but maybe is afraid to speak up. And either, I've known from time to time that I'll raise the question that I know somebody else has and is afraid to ask.
I like the way you put that. Now, James, let's talk just a bit about, is there a difference between nonprofit directors and for-profit directors in terms of trying to deal with this issue in your estimation?
That's a very good question, Dennis. And in fact, not an awful lot of difference between those two worlds. The not-for-profit community, philanthropic community, struggles with the issue of board diversity, much in the way that for-profit boards do. Although in the case of not-for-profit boards, they are often more keenly aware of the importance of having a diverse board because they have some express social purpose, especially if it's an organization that has tax-exempt status. It's going to be founded for some charitable purpose or philanthropic or other similar purpose, and so is aware of the importance of having a group of persons who govern the board and provide administrative oversight and direction who reflect the community that organization serves. But again, the challenges that we've discussed are ones that are not foreign to the not-for-profit community. And it is in particular in that community where I have seen pipeline initiatives, among other things, as very effective strategies.
And one of the things that we typically talk about is going on one or more not-for-profit boards. Doesn't that give you some great experience for serving on other boards, sort of a, I don't know if it's farm club or whatever, but does that matter in your estimation?
Absolutely. It is something of a training ground. The point has been made this evening, and it's well noted and well taken, that boards want individuals with experience. No one wants someone who is a trainee serving on a board making the important decisions that a director must make. And service on a not-for-profit board certainly positions one and trains one to have the kind of insight and thoughtfulness, the attention to detail and nuance of administration and governance that are important for the role of a corporate director. Additionally, those kinds of boards often help one to establish relationships that can open doors to a for-profit director opportunity.
Yeah.
But 80% of directors serve on one board, and the notion that you need board experience to serve on 2, 3, 4, 5 boards is not what it used to be. You can be overboarded and busy and less effective if you serve on multiple boards. At some point, to diversify, boards have to do two things. They have to make a leap of faith and bring someone on who they don't know personally, number one. And number two is they have to bring someone on to their first board. That needs a leap of faith, and that needs leadership from the governance and nominating committee.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you look at, not everybody spends the time with research probably that you do, and to some extent that I do, and NACD obviously does, to get people to understand this, Renee, one of the things that we do, isn't it, is try to educate people to get them to look at it in a different way, huh?
That's right. That's one of the goals of NACD, is to help promote this research and to help people understand the values and what good governance is all about. And good governance is about having good nominating procedures that consider diversity.
One of the things that, just in the few minutes that we have left, is we talked about succession. You were talking about this idea of term limits effectively when we talked about 9 years. Mm-hmm. Renee was on the panel we did a year or two ago, and she said, no, term limits are not a good thing. We had another lady on there with us that said, no, it's not a good thing, but she knew they were about to sell her company and she was going to have to get off anyway. That's a whole nother matter. But getting people off the board before they die, some of them die and they're still on the board. I mean, I'm talking about still in the chair. I've seen people like that. But other than term limits, and we've got age and we've got evaluations. Give us a couple of points on both of those things.
Evaluations are always better than term limits. Term limits have the law of unintended consequence. You could have someone who's non-performing after 2 or 3 years. You could have someone who is outstanding after 9 years. So where boards need to move is, and we'll talk about this tomorrow, is this notion of rigorous, consequential peer evaluations as a renewal mechanism, because that is associating performance with merit, as opposed to term limits or age, which are artificial.
Right. One of the things I did for NACD early this year, James, we had one black male. We had 2 women on the board. The black male was a very smart guy, and I asked him, they did evaluation for NACD and all these things, and the one who had the least effective marks on the evaluation was one of the women. And I asked this gentleman, what about this woman? Why is she on the board? You know what he told me? Diversity. We put her on the board 9 years ago because we needed diversity. She's the least performer. She's been on the board for 9 years now, but no one wants to say anything about it.
Well, that's wrong. You should not have diversity for diversity's sake. And if this woman or any other director is non-performing, they need to go, whether they're male, female, or other.
Easy for you to say. You can go home to get your hand done. You know, easy for you to say. James.
Well, Dennis, let's be clear. No one here is advocating for tokenism.
Right.
And that example smacks, frankly, of tokenism. No one is talking about diversity, as Richard said, for diversity's sake. And what's more, I think no one here would say that the diversity attribute or attributes, whatever they might be, gender, race, ethnicity, national origin, would be a dispositive attribute, would be a dispositive criterion of qualification. We're all an agglomeration of attributes, if you will. And I think we'd all say that the diversity aspect is one of the traits. It's something that informs, for example, the way I see some things, some of the experiences I've had, some of the history that I bring to bear on certain considerations. Those are the things that I think we're looking at.
Right, I agree. You have the last 10 seconds, Renee.
I think that boards are getting better. I think boards are waking up to this issue, and I don't think quotas are needed. I think this is going to happen because we are getting very effective women and minorities on boards.
Thank you for all 3 of you for being here. We really appreciate it. And as an observer of behavior in the boardrooms of America, I have seen the good, the bad, and the truly ugly. But most boards, as Renee said, are well run and could be even better if there were more of the right kinds of diversity that we've been talking about. So check McCuistionTV.com, and we hope you'll continue to watch us here as we talk about things that matter with people who care. Keep seat, guys.
A DVD of this program is available for $20 plus $5 postage and handling, and in Texas, applicable tax. For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email nickyn@nickymcquistion.com. Visit our website at www.mcquistiontv.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McQuistionTV or download McQuistion TV video podcast on iTunes. Production of McCuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study and Teaching of the Science of Self-Government, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future, Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.